Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the crucial insights from the fire hose of information you share with us. Today, we are strapping in for a high-speed journey straight into the C-suite, and we're not talking about human executives. The starting gun for this whole dive was this, well, pretty surprising prediction from the 2015 World Economic Forum report. They looked ahead and said, by 2026, the first artificial intelligence system will take a formal seat on a corporate board of directors. And I remember reading that and thinking, okay, that's a decade away. Pure sci-fi.
Well, you're right that it sounds like science fiction, but you're actually wrong about the timeline. That 2026 deadline, we kind of blew right past it. We are already there.
Right. That's the stunning reality check we have to start with. We're talking about actual, legally recognized AI directors. The first official announcement came, what, nearly a decade ago? 2014? A Hong Kong venture capital firm, Deep Knowledge Ventures, appointed an AI system named VITAL, stands for Validating Investment Tool for Advancing Life Sciences, as a voting member of its board.
Yeah, vital. And, if you were tempted to dismiss that as maybe just a publicity stunt by a small VC firm, well, just 2 years later, things got even more serious. This Scandinavian company, Tito, which is publicly listed on NASDAQ Nordic, mind you, appointed an AI system they called Alicia T. And Alicia T wasn't just advising, it was appointed as the top manager of a new business unit.
Wow.
Yeah, the first AI system appointed to actually run a public company division.
So, okay, if the robots are already in the boardroom, then our mission today is, well, it's critical. We need to unpack how this is legally even possible, how these systems are currently functioning in practice, at scale. And maybe most importantly, what critical guardrails like transparency, non-discrimination, accountability absolutely must be fixed in place for these autonomous directors. We need to make sure they don't bankrupt or bias the companies they're supposed to run.
Absolutely. And to understand how vital and Alicia T even got their seats, we have to start with the legal foundations. And they are, maybe surprisingly, quite accommodating. When you look at globally recognized standards for corporate governance, like specifically the G20 OECD principles, they actually do not mandate that a natural person, a human being, must perform the duties of a director.
Wait, okay, that's key, isn't it? It means globally, the definition of a director is based on the role, the function, not biology. So the door isn't structurally closed to non-humans.
Exactly right. And in modern legal practice, we already have established precedents for this kind of thing. We have the concept of a corporate director, where the powers of a board member are vested in another legal entity, like another company, not an individual human. So this practice really sets the stage for an AI. The G20 OECD principles basically hold that the specific requirements for who can act as a director are, well, they're considered the prerogative of local legislation. So if the local law allows it and the technology can actually support the functions required, then a corporation can appoint an autonomous director.
But hang on a second. There's this idea of fiduciary duty, right?
Yeah.
The board's commitment to act solely in the best interest of the shareholders of the company. How can a system, an algorithm, truly understand and fulfill that? It feels so human. Isn't that the ultimate stumbling block?
It's definitely the ultimate philosophical question, yeah. But the legal architects, they've been thinking about this transition for decades now. They often view fiduciary duty as sort of an objective set of actions that can, theoretically at least, be codified. I mean, if a human director acts purely based on data and maximizing profit within the legal boundaries, why couldn't a machine be programmed to do the same?
Okay. Let's dig into that theoretical groundwork then, because it sounds almost prophetic looking back. You mentioned Meir Dan Cohen back in the 1970s, introducing this concept of the personless corporation.
Yeah.
I mean, 1970, that really does sound like something out of a Philip K. Dick novel. He suggested replacing human management with computers would have, minimal effect on the legal status of the company.
It's pretty remarkable foresight, isn't it? And Dan Cohen's ideas, well, they really started to flourish in the 21st century as the technology actually started to deliver on that promise. So you see Professor Sean Byrne proposing a very practical solution: give legal personality to an autonomous computer algorithm. How? By placing it under the structure of a limited liability company, an LLC.
Ah, okay. So the algorithm itself isn't legally a person, but it gets treated like a business entity. So it can hold assets, incur liabilities, fulfill obligations, just like a company can.
Precisely. That's the core idea. And this really paved the way for more specialized terms to emerge. You have Lynn Lepoke talking about the algorithmic entity, where the code itself fulfills all the rights and obligations of a legal entity. Then there's the analogy to the self-driving car. John Armour and Horst Eidenmuller introduced the term autonomous self-driving company,
Right?
and Martin Petrin introduced concepts like a leaderless entity or an algorithmic company.
And all these ideas are sort of moving toward a world where AI isn't just advising management, it is management.
Absolutely. And the specialized terminology really reflects that progression. Professor Florian Maslin uses the concept of the robo-director, which you often hear associated with decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. And taking a page maybe from the tech world, Professor Gian Mosco proposes the term robo-board, which would be a board of directors composed entirely of artificial directors.
A whole roboboard. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Moving from these, theoretical concepts to massive real-world implementation. If companies aren't quite ready maybe to appoint a formal robo-director, how are they deploying AI in top management today to get that competitive edge?
Right now, there seem to be two main paths companies are taking to automate these executive decisions. The first involves creating these huge digital command centers, or DCCs, we'll talk about those. The second path is the automation of individual board functions, which can, down the line, be combined into what some researchers, like Petrin, call a fused board.
Okay, what does that fused board look like in practice? Is it just a really sophisticated piece of software?
It's a bit more than just software. It's more like a strategic architecture. The concept, pushed by Petrin, suggests that all the disparate human roles and contributions, the varied expertise you'd find in a group of directors, are fully incorporated into a single unified software or algorithm. And the goal is for this collective intelligence system to analyze data, simulate outcomes, and make decisions that consistently surpass the performance of traditional human management.
So it's not just replacing one director, it's about creating a kind of superior data-driven hive mind for the board. Okay, you mentioned digital command centers, DCCs. Can you give us an example of one of these digital factories operating at like a massive scale?
Yeah, probably the best practical example right now of a digital factory in action is the AD Energy Oil Company's DCC. They call it Panorama. And this system is just enormous. It integrates real-time information from over a dozen subsidiaries and joint ventures across their entire global operation. And we're talking about a company with a turnover exceeding 60 billion US dollars, all feeding into this one central brain.
Wow, $60 billion in turnover. That's a staggering amount of data to manage in real time. What kind of tech are they using to actually do that?
They're using intelligent analytical models and AI, of course, to just churn through all that data. And it generates operational conclusions and really detailed strategic recommendations. They also rely heavily on something called digital twin technology for monitoring.
Wait, hang on. Digital twin technology for our listeners. What does that actually mean in this context?
Okay, think of it like a perfect, constantly updated virtual copy of their entire physical operation. Every rig, every pipeline, every refinery, everything. ADNOC uses this digital twin to run simulations, to test decisions before they make them in the real world, and to monitor for anomalies, potential problems, all without risking any damage or downtime to the actual physical infrastructure. They even use blockchain technology for secure record keeping and storage.
That kind of real-time, data-driven strategy must deliver huge financial benefits, right? You mentioned earlier the reduction of agency costs. For listeners who aren't court lawyers, what specific real-world waste is this kind of AI actually cutting out?
Oh, it's a huge potential benefit. Agency costs, basically, are the financial losses that happen when managers act in their own self-interest instead of the company's best interest. Think like unnecessary perks, maybe dragging their feet on tough decisions, or even trying to hide bad news. ADNOC Panorama, theoretically, is reducing those costs dramatically just by forcing complete transparency and accountability of information. Everything's tracked in real time. It's pretty hard to hide a failure from the digital twin.
So whether the AI is formally called a director or it exists as this all-powerful DCC, the goal is basically the same: hyper-efficient, objective management.
Precisely. And, while we're talking about replacing functions, it's worth briefly noting that automation is even creeping into the selection process itself. There are scientists at Ohio State, Colorado, and Washington already researching machine learning models specifically designed to help select the human board members.
Okay, but this entire system, it really hinges on trust, doesn't it? And whether the decisions are made by Vital or Alicia T or this massive ADNOC Panorama system, they are still subject to the same strict ethical and legal requirements as any human director would be: non-discrimination, transparency, and accountability.
That is the universal standard, and it absolutely cannot be bypassed. The moment these systems start making critical decisions, hiring, firing, investments, credit approvals, they step right into a minefield of legal compliance.
Hmm.
Researchers who study this field, they pretty much universally highlight three main approaches to mitigating the inherent risks in these AI models: transparency, explainability, and accountability.
And risk, in this context, very often means bias. Right? Where does bias creep into these highly sophisticated systems? It feels like they should be objective.
Yeah, it's insidious because it can happen at three distinct stages, really. First, there's the input data you feed the system. If the historical data reflects past societal biases, and it often does, then the AI's decisions will likely be biased too. Second, bias can occur in the learning phase itself, how the model ends up weighting certain factors over others. And finally, bias can be built right into the programming, the human choices made when defining the parameters and the goals of the AI. If the historical data says men perform better in a certain role, the AI will probably reinforce that bias unless it's deliberately programmed not to.
Hmm. That immediately raises the black box problem, doesn't it? This idea that the AI might make a technically correct decision based on the data, but you cannot fully explain why it reached that specific conclusion, which makes it almost impossible to audit for bias or unfairness.
That is the ultimate tension, isn't it? Between efficiency and compliance. How complex can you make it before you can't explain it? The European Union has probably taken the most aggressive stance so far to solve this. They've given EU citizens the right to explanation for significant AI decisions. It essentially forces a degree of transparency into the algorithmic process. But, we don't even have to look overseas for the precedent here. We can look right back at U.S. legal history to see why this need for an intelligible explanation matters so much.
You're talking about the legislation around credit decisions, aren't you? From decades ago.
Yes. This is such a critical historical warning label for the corporate world today. Think back to the Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970 and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974. These laws prohibited discrimination in credit decisions based on things like race, age, religion, and so on. And crucially, if you denied someone credit, you were legally required to provide a clear, intelligible explanation for that denial.
Right. So you couldn't just say, sorry, the computer didn't like you.
Exactly. You couldn't do that. And the prevailing belief among many experts is that modern U.S. credit systems actively avoided developing overly complex, opaque algorithms precisely because of this legal requirement. We sort of avoided the black box problem in lending, at least to some extent, because a human had to be able to step in and say, look, you were denied because you have too much existing debt, or whatever the clear reason was, not just because the computer flagged your zip code in a way we don't understand. So if you can't explain the decisions of your autonomous director or your DCC today, you potentially expose the entire corporation to absolutely catastrophic legal and reputational risk.
Wow, that historical context really shifts the whole paradigm, doesn't it? Transparency isn't just like good management practice. It's actually a necessary compliance measure. And it effectively dictates the maximum complexity of the AI you can realistically deploy in these decision-making roles.
That's the big takeaway, I think. It limits the operational deployment of these really advanced systems, at least until the legal framework for explanation catches up with the technology.
So, okay. What does this all mean for the future of the corporate world? Where does this leave us? We've gone from mere Dan Cohen's theoretical personalist corporation in the 70s to real, functional, massive digital factories like 18OC's Panorama, all while kind of skirting the edge of this black box problem.
Well, it means we are definitely entering a kind of competitive loop, one based on technological acceleration. But this isn't necessarily the science fiction singularity where, robots take over the world. This is more like a corporate efficiency singularity. Companies that introduce effective AI management systems, whether it's a formal director or a DCC, will almost immediately become faster, cheaper, and more competitive than their purely human-managed peers.
Right, and that increased efficiency then gives them the profits and resources to fund even more effective management systems. So it becomes this continuous accelerating feedback loop. It's a massive self-funding competitive advantage building on itself.
Precisely. And the source material we looked at makes it pretty clear that even if legal restrictions prevent the formal appointment of an autonomous director or a full robo-board for years to come, companies can still achieve nearly all of these efficiency gains just by following the existing path, creating that internal digital factory like ADNOC that get the intelligence, the efficiency, without necessarily needing the formal legal title of director.
Which makes the shift seem almost unavoidable then, regardless of how slowly the legal codes might catch up. The technology is already performing the function, or starting to. even without the official title.
Indeed. And this really forces us to ask a final, maybe provocative question that goes beyond just efficiency and profits. If critical thinking, if strategy formation, if judgment itself, if those things become increasingly embedded and codified into an algorithm, into a robo-board culture, what happens to the uniquely human element of corporate strategy and vision? What's left? If the competitive advantage is shifting this quickly, we really have to start considering what roles humans will have left when this corporate efficiency singularity truly takes hold.